How do you talk to your children about an impending divorce? Hey there, I'm Sharon Pope. I am the Love and Relationship Coach for women who are struggling in disconnected marriages and trying to get the confidence and clarity they need to know whether they can stay and fix the struggles in their marriage, or if their only answer is to leave, and how to do that without regret. If you find this information that I share with you helpful, I hope you'll subscribe. Today we're talking about how to speak to our children about divorce. So I'm going to start with the premise that our babies are wise. Now, I call them all babies. It doesn't matter if they're 3 years old or they're 13 years old. I call them all babies. And I don't think we give our kids enough credit for what they already know. There's this underlying opinion that if the parents aren't constantly yelling at each other and throwing things, that they think they're super discreet and that their kids have no idea that there's any issue. And here's why I'm going to tell you that is not the case. It doesn't matter if they're 3 or they're 13. They are more of an observer of what's happening. This is one of the things that I teach in my coaching practice, is how to become an observer or a watcher of what's happening, as opposed to the one who's all wrapped up in it emotionally. Because when you're an observer to something, as I often am, you have a much more objective perspective and you can see things much more clearly. So your children the babies are on the outside and they're watching and they're observing what's happening and what's not happening. And they're not the ones that are wrapped up in it. And the other thing that takes place is that children sense energy. Because they're not all wrapped up in their emotions of what's happening in the moment. I can promise you, if your child is sitting at the kitchen table and you and your partner are in the kitchen and cooking dinner, but there's tension there between the two of you and you're not speaking to one another, and you can tell one or both of you is kind of pissed off, I promise you, your child senses that negative energy. So just because you're not saying the words and just because you're not throwing things at one another does not mean that they don't see what's going on or feel what's going on. So we've got to give them more credit. Now, I want to tell you a story. I had a client one time who their son was 3 years old. 3 years old. And when the couple was struggling, don't you know that every single time one of the parents picked up that child, the child would reach for the other parent to bring in like a group hug between the three of them. So if mom was holding the baby, he would reach for the dad in this scenario. And he was like, "Daddy, family hug." And he would want to bring dad in. The other thing he did is that when they both dropped him off at daycare, which happened pretty often because oftentimes they would just share a car. They'd both drive to daycare together. One would stay in the car and the other would take the child into daycare. And then they would go to work. Well, this 3-year-old, during this same time, you know what he started saying? Let's say mom was taking the child in to the daycare and dad was staying in the car. Before the child got out of the car, he said, "Daddy, don't leave mommy. She's coming right back." Why would he start saying that out of the blue? Right? They've never had a conversation with this 3-year-old that one of them might leave the other. So we got to give our kids a lot more credit for what's going on. Now, that's a 3-year-old, and it's not like that child was a savant or anything. That wasn't the case, because honestly, I've heard things like that from other parents of really, really little ones. But let's say you've got a 13-year-old at home, and they say something to you like, "Do you even like dad?" Or, "Why are the two of you even married?" Right? So around 13, 14, what they start to do is they get irritated at what they're seeing. They don't like what they're seeing and experiencing, and then they just sort of get irritated and start blaming. But what they're reaching for is an understanding of what's happening because they don't feel safe. What they know to be true doesn't feel real. And leave it to the teenagers to call us out on our stuff, right? So here's the thing about talking to your kids. about a divorce. What most people do is they spend about 10 minutes talking to their kids when there's really a divorce. Like they sit down and say, your dad and I are getting divorced, that sort of conversation. And then they come up with something that sounds a lot like, well, this has nothing to do with you. You know, your dad and I love you very much. We've just grown apart. But none of that addresses their fears or their concerns. Their underlying question is, am I safe? Am I going to be okay? That's what they're wondering. But they're going to show that to you through other fears that are going to pop up that tell them that they're not safe. Okay? So in general, what most people do is they lob out some answers that are sort of surface level, and then they think that that's enough. And then because they're uncomfortable, because these are difficult conversations, they sort of let it die and they walk away from it. That's not the best strategy. You might have felt like, well, I talked to him, but you didn't get at the root of what's going on for the child. And so it's like the real issue never really got addressed. So what I want you to be able to do is to really drop into that moment, be completely present, even when it really stings or it's uncomfortable. I want you to not run away from that moment and instead dig in and go further. Here's what I mean by that. Now, this is a very simple tool that I learned from my mentor, Martha Beck. It's called the 5 Whys. Do you remember when your baby was a baby? When your little one was little? And they would always ask you, well, why? 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 And then you finally just say, because I said so. So, turnabout's fair play. And this is the time that for you to get at what's really going on for your child and to really hear them out and not just like throw some platitudes at them, but really dive in to get at what are their real concerns so that you can address that, so that they can feel heard and understood. You are going to use the concept of the 5 whys. Now, here's how it works. You're going to ask questions that start with why. It's as simple as that. So let's say that your 8-year-old comes to you and says, are you and daddy getting a divorce? Instead of running away or shying away and going, no, of course not. There's some reason why your child's asking that. So it would really be beneficial for you to know why and not just brush it off. So let's say that you two are considering a divorce. So you could ask him, first why question. Why would it be so bad if your dad and I got a divorce? Well, I don't want you guys to get a divorce. Second why question. Why don't you want us to get a divorce, darling? And let's say that your child says, well, I won't get to see you and dad all the time. Okay. Well, here's the thing. I want you to know this. I am always going to be your mother. Mom's still mom. Dad's still dad. And if your dad and I decided to get a divorce, there might be times where you're going to be just with me. And you're going to have my undivided attention. Sort of like a date day with mom. And then there's going to be times when you're going to be just with your dad and you're going to have his undivided attention. Sort of like a date with your dad. So why would that be so bad, darling? So that's when your child might tell you something like, well, I don't want to have 2 different rooms. I don't want to have 2 different houses. Okay, now we're getting at it, right? I'm concerned about my environment because home is my safety. And so now I'm going to have 2 different rooms. Well, why would it be so bad if you had 2 different rooms that you got to decorate, that you got to make your space? And like one you could do, in a theme of like sports themes, and maybe another one you do something really cool with video games. Like what if you had 2 different rooms, but you loved them both? Why would that be bad? Right? So you just keep asking why. Let's say his response is, well, I don't want to have a new mommy and daddy. Now they've just told you something important. They're afraid that they have to give you up and they have to like insert someone new. You're going to want to address that. If your dad and I ever decided to get a divorce, it is possible that we might end up in another relationship. But no one's ever going to replace mommy and no one's ever going to replace daddy. I want you to know that you can count on. There might be other people in our lives, just like, we have you have aunts and uncles, right? That's my sister and brother. But that doesn't replace mom and dad, does it? So when you start asking why questions, open-ended why questions, you get at what is the real fear. And then you can address the real fear. And then they feel validated and heard. It's super powerful. The biggest thing I want you to take away from this is all you have to know is that when these opportunities present themselves, and sometimes it's the kid saying something to you that sort of takes you off guard, or sometimes it's, you're sitting down and you're telling the child about getting a divorce. I want you to drop in and be completely present in that moment, even when it gets uncomfortable, because 30 minutes of discomfort and going there with your children can create all the difference for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives. So are you willing to be uncomfortable for 30 minutes? A couple times so that your child can feel safe and so that you can have a great relationship with them and sustain that over the rest of their lives because they really felt heard and you addressed their specific concerns. But if you don't ask questions, you actually don't know what their specific concerns are. You're just bringing up what you think it is. And that's why we launch those platitudes of, well, this has nothing to do with you. Mommy and daddy love you very much. But that doesn't do anything to address their concerns. They probably know that you love them. To understand what their concerns are, and every child is different, you got to ask the important questions. And all you have to do is just ask the question of why. I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. And if you want to know every time I post a new video, just ring the bell in the upper right corner and you'll be notified of that. All right, thanks so much for being a part of my community. And if you want to take it further for yourself, you can check out my book, Stay or Go: How to Find the Confidence and Clarity You Need to either fix the struggles in your marriage or leave without regret. Take good care.